A while ago, I decided to share some of my favorite vintage knitting hacks or tips from this book, and I decided that I would share a few more today. I've saved my favorite for last, so I hope you'll stick around to see what that one is. So we're going to start with some ways of casting on that are new to me. I personally have never done an invisible edge cast on with live stitches, so this is going to be my first attempt at something like this. Invisible edge is a very useful method of casting on, although it is seldom used. So this kind of sounds like from the description that this is a really nice way to add fringe, and I can kind of see that from the illustrations. So we begin with a long end of yarn, preferably in a different color from the garment to be knitted. Oh, this is my pretend garment, so never mind. This is my contrast color. Then with a knitting yarn, make a loop and insert the 2 needles, keeping the odd yarn as the basic thread. I wish that they did the instructions and the picture for this on the same page. It's gonna be tough when I keep on having to go back and forth while trying to figure this out for the first time. So we're gonna start with a slip knot, it looks like, and we're gonna hold both of these needles together. So the instructions say with a knitting yarn, you make a loop and you wind the yarn over the needles held together in the right hand, each turn over the needles being a stitch. So for me, what I would want to do is hold this in this hand and just kind of have it looped around in a spiral. This to me doesn't look like the illustration. That just looks like it's wound back and forth. I feel like this could be explained better. I have a sense of what they want me to do instead. So I'm gonna try what I think they wanted me to do, but in my opinion, I think they could have explained that a little bit better. So in my opinion, we would go this way, and then that way, and then this way, and then that way. It looks a bit messy, but I think when I pull the contrast color straight down, and you compare this with the illustration, I think this is quite close to what they're going for. But this is not really explained in any of the other casting on methods here. That would be incredibly confusing to me if I feel like I already know this cast on method from something else, but I can't say exactly from what. So now what do we gotta do? We gotta take one needle out and knitting into the front of the stitch, proceed in the ordinary way. Okay, wow, this is a very loose cast on, or at least the way I've done it. And it's probably because I have basically 0 practice at this. So now I've got the cast on done with live stitches. I know that there are other methods to do this, like a crochet cast on, something like that. I've never tried that. So this is a fun first for me, and I learned it from a vintage book. It's a little loose. If I were doing this in an actual garment, I would probably redo it, but I learned it. So let me knit a little bit further on this swatch, and then let me show you the way that I would personally use this type of cast on edge, and the way that this book recommends that you use it by adding some fringe, which would be really fun. Okay, I have knit a good length of my swatch here, and now I'm going to show you what I would personally do with this type of cast on, which is to take this piece of knitting, fold it over, and then knit these 2 stitches together. So one from the knitting forward edge and one from the bottom cast on edge. And that creates this lovely little folded over bit of knitting at the bottom, creates like a really nice hem. I'll show you some knitting that I've used it on in the past in my machine knitting. I actually have an example right over there on the needle, and then one from the cast on edge, there we go. What might help is if I had like another needle to put the cast on edge on. 12, there we go. That'll make it a little bit easier, I think, to knit from the cast on edge. One on there, one on there, and knit that together. There we go. One on there, knit that together. Okay, so now the cast on edge has been fully incorporated into my next bit of knitting. I'm just going to keep on knitting up. So you see that this is the right side of the work, and it's fully smooth, but the bottom is actually double. So this is genuinely what I would do for, I don't know, like a top of a skirt, and you could put some elastic through it. And I have used it, genuinely, I have used this for my socks. So let me get you a pair of socks I use this on. Here are a pair of socks that I made on my knitting machine, and you can see that they have that folded over double knit bit of knitting at the top. Let me show you that cast on one more time, because now I want to try what the book recommends that we use it for, which is to add fringe, which I think is kind of fun. That gives me another chance to show you this cast on method while I'm not also learning it. So let me see if I can demonstrate it to you one more time, and maybe it'll help some of you. I think this is actually kind of like a fun way to have an easy invisible cast on or live stitch cast on if you want. So it goes kind of like, you keep this one and you go like this, and then like that, and then like this, and then like that, and then like this, and then like that. If anyone knows what kind of cast on I'm doing right there, please do let me know. The rest of the swatch is done, so now we're going to do what the book recommends that you do with an invisible cast on like this, which is adding a fringe to the bottom of your knitting. This is really nice for scarves, it says, which I agree, I do like fringes on my scarves. Here is some hand spun that I'm just going to use as the fringe, and as we pull out our contrast color thread, we're just going to add a few strands of fringe. Going to see if we can improve our technique in this over time. Hopefully we can. And there we go. I wouldn't call this particularly speedy. This is going to take me a while to finish across the bottom here for sure, but it is kind of a really cute fringe effect on the bottom. So let me check in when this is finished all the way across. Okay, can I be honest? I'm about halfway done, and this is taking so long for even just a swatch to finish this fringe, and it's so fiddly. So I'm gonna call it here because I'm gonna be honest, I don't have the patience to keep going. So I am just going to go ahead and tie this off, and we can move on to the next vintage hack, tip, or trick that I want to cover. So now I want to talk about casting off. And there are many ways that you can cast off, many ways that really emphasize elasticity for things that you want to be stretchy, but sometimes you don't want things to be too stretchy because then it looks untidy. But there are two that I haven't personally used myself. So one is called the crochet cast off, and another one is called the invisible edge cast off. Let's look at both of those casting off methods a little bit closer. Before we try the next vintage knitting hack, I'm going to take a second to get something to drink, because once I get absorbed in projects like this, I can very easily sit here knitting for several hours and completely forget that water exists. So a big thank you to Ultima Replenisher for sponsoring today's video. Ultima is an electrolyte drink made for normal everyday hydration, which is much more my speed than something designed exclusively for running a marathon or recovering from a very eventful night out. It has all 6 key electrolytes, but still 0 sugar, 0 calories, and 0 carbs. It's also low in sodium and sweetened with organic stevia made with plant-based flavors and colors. Basically, it's a very small thing that makes remembering to hydrate while I'm knitting, editing, walking Nutella, or running errands a lot more enjoyable. My favorite flavor is blue raspberry because it takes me right back to going to the movies as a kid. Honestly, I love it so much. This tastes really, really nice. It's just like a very light, sweet flavor without being overly sweet, and it definitely has that blue raspberry taste that I love. There's a bunch of other flavors to enjoy though, like passion fruit and orange and cherry pomegranate. I'm not even going to list all of them, but there's a lot that I enjoy. Hydration is part of an overall healthy lifestyle, and Ultima helps support my hydration goals in a way that fits very easily into my regular day. Head to the link in the description below to stay hydrated with Ultima Replenisher. Thank you again so much to Ultima Replenisher for making videos like this even possible. And let's head back to the next piece of vintage knitting advice and see if it's actually even helpful or useful. We're going right back to the swatches that we had tested some different casting on methods before, and we're going to try out the 2 different casting off methods now. So for this one, it says to hold the work in my left hand and use a crochet hook in my right, because we are doing the crochet cast off. Basically what it says to do, with the right hand, insert the hook through the first 2 stitches and pull the second through the first, letting the first go. Proceed to the end of the row and finish off the last stitch. I'm inserting it into the first 2, and then I'm pulling the second to the first, letting the first go. And then I'm just doing that all the way across. And what I would actually want to do is I would want to work the other way around, because I would want this to pull through the last stitch, because I'm just going to have a last stitch that's kind of free. Let me show you. I'll do it all the way to the end, and then I'll show you what is going on. And they don't have any illustrations for this cast off either, so I don't know if I'm doing this right at all. So now we're at the last one, and I've got nothing to secure this. If I had cast off towards the other direction, I could have used that to secure this, and this is quite a tight cast off. Whoops. Okay, so I'm actually going to undo everything we just did. And we're gonna see if we can do it in the opposite direction, potentially. We're back to where we started right before the cast off. Now, we were working from the last end back, and either I would like to carry this working strand with it through the cast off to make it elastic and have something to bind off, or we move this to this needle and we bind off the opposite direction. That's kind of like the closest I can think to do, because working with a working yarn isn't really at all part of the description. So I'm gonna just transfer everything to the right hand needle and hold it like this. So then our working yarn is on the opposite of where we would usually want it on the needle. And then we redo the work again like this. First two, second one through and off. Second one through and off. And we just go all the way like that down the row. It'd be a little bit easier with a slightly smaller crochet hook, or one that matches the needle size rather than one that's a bit big, but it works well enough. Pull that tail through, and that's secured and fully cast off. Again, it's not a very stretchy cast off, but it does look quite neat, and it is quite quick for me to do. So I do like that one. And again, this is where we've got that lovely little hem at the bottom. So I like this sample a lot, actually. I am quite skeptical of this second cast off method because it feels a little bit like a cop-out, but I will try it. It is called the Invisible Edge Cast Off, which matches the invisible edge cast on and a length of yarn threaded through all the stitches of the last row. Fringe or lace can be added, explained in invisible cast on. So it is literally just, I'm gonna cut off a length of this and put it through all the live stitches, and that's a cast off, which is, in my opinion, very unstable and not like a finishing technique. It's more just a way to make sure that your work doesn't unravel until you've got something more stable on the stitches. Yeah, I literally just put the darning needle through all the live stitches, and I'm gonna pull it through. And I guess there you have that cast off. And then I'd have a fringy little swatch, which would be very cute. But again, I've done the fringe. The fringe takes forever, and I don't actually want to use up my hand spun to do the rest of this fringe. So we're gonna leave it at that. I wouldn't recommend this cast off at all, actually. So let's go on to the next vintage tip. Okay, now this bit I think is going to be the most useful for me personally, and if we combine it with the first video, I think you can make buttons and matching buttonholes. So this time we're talking about many different ways that you can make buttonholes. Often the buttonholes that I've always made in any cardigans, usually the buttons that I make are for cardigans, so that's my experience. They're the traditional kind of horizontal buttonhole, the cut buttonhole, which I have never attempted, so I think this would be an interesting one to try. So let's take a closer look at those two methods. Like I said, I've knit a few buttonholes before. I usually make them horizontally because that flows really nicely with the knitting, but I've never made them vertically. Looking at the instructions and illustrations though, it's pretty simple because you just knit on two separate pieces of knitting until your buttonhole is as long as you want, and then you join the two pieces together and continue knitting. There are two methods I've never tried that I still very much want to try. One is knit button loops. I've only ever had button loops crocheted on. I've never knit them, so that'll be one that I'm trying with this swatch, and cut in button loops. I know that you can cut in button loops, but I've never tried it myself, so this will be the first time I'm trying it, and I'm trying it with the help of this vintage instruction manual. So let me knit a little bit further on this swatch, and then we will try the button loop method. And I'm gonna save my favorite for last because we are doing a lot of new things on that one, including using a motorized knitting machine to help us make the swatch that we are going to cut open. While I'm knitting a little bit on this swatch before we get to the button loops, if you like the sweater that I'm wearing in this video, I'm actually working on a pattern right now. So if you wanna be part of the group of people that hears more about it first and gets access to it first, it'll first go out to my patrons, which I'm super excited about. And I'm gonna be starting a test knit soon, so the call out for that will be on Patreon first. If that is not in your budget, which I fully understand, another way that you can hear a little bit early about this pattern is if you sign up for my email newsletter. If you don't want to sign up for any of that, that's also absolutely fine. You'll be hearing about it on this channel as well. Now we're ready to try out the button loop method, and there's not a lot of information to it, but I'm very curious how this is actually going to work. So it says to make a number of loops at the edge of an opening on the knitted garment, knit them on the return row and cast them off on the next and sew loop into position. I have some questions about this, so let's just go for it. I'm at the edge right now. I'm going to cast on 3 stitches in just a very simple way. Let's call that the loop. Actually, let's make it 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've cast on the extra stitches, then it says knit them on the return row, cast them off in the next. Is that 3 rows in total or 4? Because it makes a difference, and I'll tell you why. So I'm going to knit them now. Okay, now we're back at the stitches that we had cast on in order to create the loop. If we say that we've already done the return, the instructions say on the next one you cast off. The problem is then our working yarn has to be cut and reattached, or our working yarn, then we, on the immediate next row, we go back and that leaves a loop, but the loop is very eyelet on the side, kind of like if you have an oven mitt that has a loop on it that you can hang it up, very much like that, which isn't what I usually see on sweaters like this. I don't think this is what it means. So I think what it means is that we actually knit this, and this is what's called the return row. So I'm going to knit the stitches on the quote-unquote return. Now we're going to cast off, and again, we've learned a lot of different cast-off methods, but I'm just going to use a very basic one that I prefer. The thing about this method is it does leave you with quite a chunky button loop, but it is a strong one. So now we're done with the casting off, we're just going to knit across. What you can see is that we're left with a little flap of fabric, so we can either sew it down or we can sew it up. And then that becomes our button loop. And it does say to sew it into place. So I would knit a little bit further and sew it probably onto the top of the fabric there. If we hadn't done the cast off here, it would be a thinner loop and it would just be immediately like this. So we'd have a very scrunched button loop, which I don't think is appropriate for this. So let me knit a few more rows and then you can kind of see where this would be sewn into place. So I knit a few more rows and then I sewed that little tail end of my button loop onto the knitting, which leaves us with this perfect little eyelet buttonhole, which I think is actually very serviceable. It is quite thick, but that does mean that I think it'll be very robust. So if I were to do it again, these are the instructions that I would follow, just so that we're not having to cut off the tail end of the active strand of knitting and then having to reattach it, because that just leaves more ends to weave in, which I'm personally really not a fan of. Now, to give my hands a little bit of a break on knitting all of these samples, I am going to use my newest to me knitting machine, which is a Pass-Up Duomatic 80. It's a Swiss-made industrial level knitting machine, and what's most exciting about this is that it actually has a motor to run automatically, and I got it to work. Okay, so just knit for a while. That was so exciting to be able to use the motorized knitting machine to make this sample block. So much less stress, honestly, and I cannot wait. That'll be a video that's coming up soon. So if you want to see more, feel free to subscribe, because you're going to see an actual piece be knit on that motorized knitting machine if that's what you're interested in. Now to the buttonhole. So it says, for cut buttonholes, it is best before cutting to run a thread around the proposed cut to prevent the stitches from dropping. We're gonna use buttonhole stitching. I'm gonna have to remind myself what buttonhole stitching is. I'm gonna be honest, I sometimes forget. And let's try it. Let's see how this goes. I've got some scissors, my darning needles, and contrasting thread. So that's just kind of the safety stitching around the buttonhole that I'm gonna cut so that we hopefully don't lose it above and below. So I'm gonna choose somewhere in the middle there, and we're gonna cut 4 stitches clean through. 1 stitch, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we've got loose stitches and we want to secure it with buttonhole stitching. Okay, so this hack definitely works. We do have a buttonhole. It's the top down stitches feel pretty secure. The side stitches could be more secure. So I think 2 things would improve it, which would make me use it. 1, I'm pretty sure this is a superwash wool. So I want some wool that's a little bit more sticky and felty so that those side stitches feel a little bit more secure, like it's not gonna unravel. And 2, I need to improve my hand sewing skills because these buttonhole stitches are atrocious. So they do not look good. Things are kind of curling because it's kind of a big hole. But overall, I do think that this would work with a few improvements on my side. And you might have the better skills than I do, honestly. So those were another 3 different tips, tricks, methods, or vintage hacks that I got from one of my vintage books. I have a bunch more vintage books and antique knitting books, also crocheting books, and on a bunch of different fibercraft subjects. And I think there's always a lot that can be learned. I definitely don't know everything, and there's many different sources to learn it. So I think this is one fun source for me to look at. Not saying that these tips and tricks didn't already exist or aren't known in other ways, but this is one way that I personally like to gather and then share information. Looking back, I think there are some helpful ones and some not super applicable ones, at least to me and my personal knitting, but I'm still so glad that I got to try all of them out and think about the potential use cases, and maybe you found it helpful. What was your favorite? Do you think you're going to use any of these in your knitting going forward? Let me know. Thank you again so much for spending some of your precious time with me, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Bye!